I'm just going to sum up this round in 2 simple words: absolute carnage. Hey everyone, welcome back to another video from A Man Talks NRL SuperCoach. Round 3 has just been absolutely crazy. We've got nail-biting finishes, injuries galore, questionable referee decisions, you name it, we've got the lot. So let's not waste any more time, let's get straight into it. So the first game of the week saw the Panthers versus Storm in an absolute nail-biter, with the Panthers getting some revenge, winning 12-10 against the Storm. Now, in terms of the game itself, it was such an enjoyable watch as a neutral fan. You know, you could see how intense the match between the two was. It was very, very physical. You know, they were just going for it. And, you know, the Panthers were losing up until the very, last 2 minutes of the game, basically. And then Kurt Capewell comes in with that last-minute try. And then, to top it all off, we've got that try-saving tackle by the Panthers at the very end. Olam, you know, he could have just passed to his left and had Josh Adokar over for a try, but, you know, that's just the way that it fell for the Panthers this week. In terms of the players, in terms of their SuperCoach output, a lot of good players for the Panthers. Dylan Edwards had a cracking first half. You know, he was involved in everything, and he scored about 66 points in that first half. But then we find out later that he's got a broken hand, and he's probably going to be out for the next 4 weeks. In terms of the wingers, Charlie Staines, I'm sure there have been a lot of people who were thinking, I'm going to sell him this week, and there's no way he's going to score against the Storm, right? You know, he scored, in the teens, his first 2 games against easy opponents. Storm, no way. And then he goes over and scores a try, right? It just has to happen, right? That's just typical SuperCoach. So he got 50. I think he's actually now been updated to 56 or 55. So anyone who held on to him like I did, that's a good outcome for us. You know, I didn't actually play him in my 17 because I thought against the Storm that'd be a pretty tough opponent. But, you know, him going that try just shows that at least, you know, he just has to score 1 or 2 tries, and hopefully his value will then start to upswing. So pretty good from him. Happy to have him. Brian To'o on the other side, you know, he's just an absolute workhorse, you know, always makes runs out of his own end, and he's ended up on 52, I think actually 57 now with updates. So, you know, 57 points from To'o, again, without scoring a try, similar to last week against the Dogs when you got 55. That's just an unbelievable floor for your starting centre wing. So extremely happy to own him. He was very close to scoring that try in the corner as well, but he just had his foot out in the touchline. So, you know, if we added that, we could have been looking at like a 70, 80 point score from him. So I think hoping for the time when he will score some tries, and then, you know, we should be getting some big scores from him. So definitely someone I'd be looking to bring into your center wing. You just know that what you're going to get from him is a solid 50 to 55 points just in the work rate alone. Now you look at that, he made 1 tackle, and then he's made 23 hit-ups, and then a 16 extra where he's ran over 8 meters. So no, what's that? 39 points alone just coming from runs, which is ridiculous. Through a few tackle breaks in there as well. And, you know, he gets a great floor. Jerome Luai, he's got that 32. I think he's now updated to the 40s. He did seem a little bit quieter in this game. I thought Matt Burton was doing a lot more of the general in-play kicking, and he looked quite good as well. But we just didn't see Jerome Luai be as deadly as he normally is. I think this was probably due to the fact that in this particular game, he was playing on the right side, probably just to compensate for Cleary. I'd expect once Cleary comes back, Luai is going to go straight back to the left-hand side, where I would expect him to probably perform a little bit better. And, you know, it was a tough opponent. Obviously, it's the Storm, so I'm not surprised to see his points go down a little bit. Even getting like a 46, given that he performed so well in the first 2 rounds, as an owner, I think you would take that. His value is still probably going to go upwards anyway, so I think it's still very good showing from him, given he didn't have any kind of attacking stats apart from that forced dropout. Matt Burton, not really SuperCoach relevant, given that, you know, he only gets a run in when Cleary's out, but I thought in general he looked quite good. He's got an amazing left foot, you know, he's got a really good range on his kicks. He was able to do some kind of torpedo bombs, which I just don't understand why players don't do this more often. The end over end kick is so easy for like wingers and fullbacks to catch. Obviously, I'm saying it must be harder to kick those taut bombs, but it just seems so, you know, it seems as a viewer, you would imagine when they do those taut bombs or the floaty, wobbly ones, it's just so much more difficult for the backs to catch those. So I don't really understand why more 5'8", at least, and halfbacks don't try to do them more often. But who am I to say? I'm not a rugby league player, I'm not a coach or anything, that's just my opinion. But I thought overall he looked quite good. He was able to control the game relatively well for the Panthers. But obviously, as soon as Nathan Cleary's back next week, he's going to be out of the side, you'd expect. In terms of the forwards, not really many highlights here aside from Capewell. So as a Capewell owner, was extremely happy to see him score for that try. Not a Panthers fan, but I was cheering that try on. You know, again, that 90-point plus effort. I think a few people did put the vice captain on him, which, you know, was a very good shout. And I think given this week, there were so many players who were out, a lot of players are going to be copying an auto emergency score anyway. So I think the vice captain loophole, was a lot more in play. And I think if you put the vice-captain on Capewell, that was a pretty safe vice-captain loophole to use. Obviously, a lot of people would have been expecting a captaincy on Teddy, and so obviously you never know with Teddy what he's going to end up doing. The way it panned out in the end, Capewell was the better option to do the vice-captain loophole on. Again, playing 80 minutes was a good sign. Last week he only played about 50 or so, but it's probably a good sign that when the Panthers do come up against tough opposition, they're expecting him to play the full 80. That probably was helped that Liam Martin, I think, had a HIA as well, so that probably just gave him some kind of a benefit that he was going to be playing more minutes. Isaiah Yeo has been ticking along actually quite nicely for any owners of him, coming in with a 68-point effort. I think the thing with Yeo is that he's priced pretty expensive at the moment. I think he's above 600k, and I think there are other second rowers, who are much cheaper than him and probably offering a little bit better value at the moment. But he's someone I think, maybe down the line, hopefully, if he does drop in value over time during the season, we can pick him up and, you can rely on him for a good solid 60-point average. Props a bit underwhelming for the Panthers this game. James Fisher-Harris, he had quite an extended spell on the sideline and he only ended up playing the 53 minutes. Moses Leota, only the 38. Obviously, the key thing to note here is with Dylan Edwards going down, what that means in terms of who's going to replace him at fullback. We saw Tyrone May move off into that fullback role for the second half of the game. Not quite sure if that would be the same thing that would happen next match as well. They've got a few options. I think obviously Charlie Staines was apparently a fullback going up through the juniors, so he could potentially slot in there. Same with Stephen Crichton. Apparently Mombrowski potentially as well. And then obviously they've got Tyrone May who could fill in. So it'll be interesting to see on Teamless Tuesday as to who gets the nod at that fullback spot. But aside from that, it wasn't really too much of a high-scoring game in terms of the SuperCoach points, aside from Capewell, just given that it was a relatively low point-scoring effort, 12 points to 10. But again, good outcome for the Panthers to get the win in this. For the Storm, I guess the key performers here would be Cam Munster and Brandon Smith. Cam Munster, he just looked electric during that game, and this is the thing with guys like him. You just know that he can perform well in against the tough opponents. He's that kind of a player. He plays well in the big games. So as a non-owner, it was very hard to watch him kind of tear up. He had a couple of line breaks, a couple of forced dropouts, and I was like, oh God, all these points as a non-owner is hard to watch. But you have to give it to the guy. He's an amazing player. And what he does in real life translates really well to SuperCoach too. And Brandon Smith, obviously scoring that try, I think a lot of people would have been selling him this week. And I don't, it is hard sometimes in SuperCoach when you see the player that you sold do well in the next game. I guess it always comes down to that thinking of, try to think again as to why you did that decision to make that trade. It should be more focused, I guess, on the decision making, less on the outcome, whether you thought the trade was a good one. It's easy to say in hindsight, oh, I shouldn't have traded Brandon Smith, but someone said, oh, his minutes were down, his points weren't going down, his price is probably going to go down with the first price change, and so you maybe made a switch to like a Reed Marnie or Jaden Brayley, and say maybe they won't perform as well as Brandon Smith this week. It can be annoying to be like, oh, I shouldn't have made that trade, but I think at times like this, it's just you just have to kind of forget about the outcome and just focus on the decision you made and the reasons as to why you made it. But pretty good effort from him. Christian Welch was a little bit disappointing. I owned him and he only scored about 45, and I think he's updated to like 43. And the minutes that were a bit of a concern for me, only playing the 48. I was hoping that with these injuries to Dale Finucane and Harry Grant, he'd be creeping up to say more that 55 to maybe 60 minute mark, and so hopefully get his points up to that 55 to 60 as well. But it just hasn't quite happened. He had a good game last week in terms of SuperCoach points, but this week not so much. So given that there's so much other carnage happening at the moment with a lot of people's teams, I wouldn't say he's like an immediate sell, but he's definitely someone I'm looking to maybe be a bit of a stepping stone to another gun. So say, for example, Payne Haas will come back in round 4, and Christian Welch, if he does bridge the gap a little bit, that might make that trade up to Payne Haas a little bit easier. Or for example, in my situation, I've got some dual players in my second row who I can switch to front row forward, so I can make that trade from say Christian Welch to an Angus Crichton, for example, which is something I've been looking to do maybe this week or in the week after. But yeah, not too much output from him, which was a little bit disappointing. If you invested in any of the backs, again, they didn't really do too well. I think this is a bit of a risk with the Storm, is that the points do get shared quite a bit amongst the backs. Even Adokar, he scored a try and he still only scored 40 points. He just doesn't quite have the base stats. Olam looked quite threatening, so scoring the 33 and mainly just base, but obviously he could have almost scored that try at the very end of the game, or he could have put Josh Adokar over for a try. But yeah, again, not a massive showing from him. I did recommend Olam as a bit of a pod center wing for the next few games. He didn't perform so well this game, but he's got the Broncos and the Bulldogs coming up, so you could expect him maybe to do really well in those matchups. So the next game was the Dragons versus Manly, with the Dragons taking this game out 38-12. The Dragons overall, I think, looked quite good, but I think it's maybe potentially more about Manly just not being very good at the moment. I think you can definitely put the whipping boys tag on Manly. I think if any teams play them, definitely a good team to target in terms of attacking players. I think there are a lot of points on offer when they're versing the Sea Eagles. In terms of the attacking players at the Dragons, Zach Lomax had a great game, again showing why he was such a good asset in SuperCoach last season. He scored a couple of tries, he got 28 points in goal kicks alone. I think he's updated to around 93, so very similar to what he was scored at pre-updates. And again, really great game from him. I think when you have that added goal kicking benefit and, the Dragons potentially can rack up a score, he's obviously going to profit a lot from that. So he's definitely someone I think I'm keeping an eye on. I think he's still going to score below his break. He still scored below his break even, so he should hopefully be going down in value over the next few weeks. But, if there's a time where the Dragons have a decent run of games and he's potentially dipped in price, I think he'd be a really good pickup in your center wing. He's usually pretty consistent in terms of offering points. Matt Duffy again had a pretty decent game, scoring a double, but with Duffy again is one of those guys where unless you're going super pod, how can you fit him into your fullbacks when you've got Teddy, Pappenhausen, Latrell, all performing really well? It's just one of those cases where it's just hard to get him into your team, but pretty good effort from him. Corey Norman had a great game. He seemed to be more of the dominant kind of playmaker in this game versus Ben Hunt. So Corey Norman, scored at 87 points. He had a line break, a couple of try assists. If he'd passed a little bit better to Duffy, he could have actually put Duffy through for another try. So Duffy easily could have had a hat trick. Corey Norman could have had another try assist, and he could have been looking at a 100-point score. But again, not someone I've really been seriously considering into my SuperCoach team. He can be a little bit inconsistent, and I think in the halves, even in 5-8, I think there's just so many other better options who are more consistent than him. Ben Hunt, obviously, with that 36-point effort, I think a lot of owners would have been hoping for a little bit more from him. I think if anyone was looking to do that Nathan Cleary trade out for a week, which I wouldn't really have recommended anyway, Ben Hunt was set to go up a lot in value, and against the Sea Eagles, I think we're hoping for a big game from him. But only the 36 points. Obviously, we found out later that he was playing with basically a fractured leg, and he's actually now going to be out for, I think, 4 to 6 weeks. So I think, obviously, a lot of people would have been looking at him as like a 1-2 week punt anyway. So, if you factor that into your trade plans already, it's not really a massive blow that he's injured, but probably the points that you were hoping for just weren't quite there in this particular game. He did have that late try assist, which really did flatter his score. I think aside from that, he was probably looking at like a 20-point effort. In terms of the forwards, not really many like big highlights here. Obviously, Tarek Sims got a pretty decent score, getting a try assist and a line break as well. Popular kind of cheapy options we're looking at would be like Terrell Fumeono. He scored 37, which is not in 54 minutes, I'll take that. I didn't play him. In hindsight, I should have played him. We'll touch on why my reserve selections are a little bit later. But 37 points, he should be looking to go up in value and make a little bit of coin to start the season. Daniel Alvaro, who I think was another relatively popular front row forward cheapie, only the 28 points and the 38 minutes off the bench, probably not a great sign. I think the base output wasn't quite there as to what he's had in previous games, where I think he was getting like 44 and 50. So only scoring the 28. Not a great output from him, but again, I think at his price, he would probably still be looking to go up in value. With the Sea Eagles, there's actually some good performers here amongst this game. Dylan Walker had a pretty decent game, scoring 63, but in terms of real life game, I thought he had a couple of instances where, again, he looks a little bit shaky still at fullback, a couple of drop balls, and I think he did actually get a bit of a shoulder complaint at some point during the match. Jason Saab, look, I traded Jason Saab this week for Ryan James, which we'll see if it's a good trade or not, but, I wasn't looking to play Saab anyway. He's had 2 low scores, and yes, I know cheap center wings, they can be very volatile, but he just hasn't looked like he could offer anything really in terms of good SuperCoach points. So to be honest, trading him out for Ryan James, while I did lose net on the points, Ryan James, even with that really low score that's going to be from this week's game, he's still going to set to go up a lot in value compared to Jason Saab. So to be honest, I'm not really too disappointed with that trade, even though Ryan James did have a very low scoring game. Cherry Evans obviously got that really late consolation try to kind of bump up and flatter his score to that 80-point mark. But again, I don't think he was really anyone that people were considering seriously, unless people were doing a 1-week trade from, say, Cleary to Cherry Evans. But he had a really high break even. He's going to set to go down in price quite a bit. So I don't imagine too many people would be jumping on him, especially with seeing how the Sea Eagles have played. They just don't look inspiring at all in terms of their attack. The one real key player I think to keep an eye on though is Josh Schuster. He had an amazing game. He scored 82 points, which I think is actually updated to like 90 points now. So the real challenge for people is with all these injuries that have happened, how can they actually get Schuster in next week? Next week, Schuster, if he is named to play again, will be the week that he does go up in price. If you're wanting to jump on that price rise, you'll have to get him in within this current week's trades. He's coming off, I think, 46 in his first game, 90 points in his second, and he's priced at 203k in your 5'8 position. In that 5'8 position, a lot of people are going to be going with obviously like a gun player, like a Munster or a Cody Walker, and the reserve is probably going to be like a Matt Moylan potentially or a Connor Watson. So it's very hard. I think if you have Connor Watson, you wouldn't be looking to trade him. He's probably going to also go up in value. If you do hold Moylan, that obviously could be an easy trade from going Matt Moylan to Schuster. Moylan, I think he only scored again. I think he scored around the 40, so not a bad effort from him. But Schuster looks to go up heaps in value after that 90-point game will be in his rolling average. So it's going to be for some people very tricky, I think, to be bringing him in. Like me, for example, in my 5'8, I've got Dylan Brown and I've got Connor Watson. Unless I potentially wanted to say trade out Jacob Little, I could go Little to Watson by swapping the two and then bring in Schuster in for Little. But again, I don't even know if I'd be looking to do that because Little's probably also going to be going up quite a bit in value too. And I think just trading him out for the one price rise might not be worth it, given that how precious the trades are looking with all the injuries that are happening. So it potentially might just be one that I have to just take him, just miss him. But, if you had no real kind of injury problems with your team, and you're in a position where you can kind of make that luxury 5'8 trade down to Schuster, he looks a great cash go option for the next week. So next up, we had the Rabbitohs versus the Roosters, with the Rabbitohs taking this out 26-16. I went to this game, and I'll be honest, that 26-16 score does flatter the Roosters. I think the 24-6 that it was for quite a while really should have been more reflective, I think, of the way the game was played. The Rabbitohs were completely dominant in this game. The Roosters had so many kind of injuries and it just didn't look like they were ever getting into a rhythm. One thing I was really impressed by when watching the game live was how good the Rabbitohs defense is. Every play that the Roosters just tried to put on, all the Rabbitohs players were there. If the Roosters ever wanted to shift to the edge, the Rabbitohs would slide really well and cover it off. So I think their defense is actually looking really good, which I guess is one potential question mark maybe of the Rabbitohs coming into the season. I think everyone knew that they could score a lot of points, but they've been touted as potential premiership favourites, and premierships are always won on a good defence, but they really showed having a good solid defence against the Roosters. A lot of key players in this. I think it's always going to be the left side players of the Rabbitohs. So Latrell did really well in this game, getting in the 60s. He looked very threatening again down the left hand side. Dan Gagai had a great game where he scored that try and set up one of his own. And Cody Walker, I think, was the real winner here. He's on 89, but he actually updated, I think, to 95. Scoring that double. Plenty of tackle breaks thrown in there. The couple of line breaks, and this is what you get from Cody Walker again. Didn't quite do as well as what he did against the Roosters last year with that 200. Just the 95 though. Not too shabby though. But again, he's someone I'm looking to really bring into my team, I think, over the next few weeks. I think they've got games against the Broncos and the Bulldogs coming up. So, those are prime matchups for the Rabbitohs where I think they can score a lot of points. And he's shown as well that he can score, big points against the top teams, similar to Munster. So, really, Walker and Munster, again, this week, really showing their value, I think, as the gun 5'8s to go for. I think with that 95-point effort, he's still going to go down in price a little bit, given that he had a relatively low score against the Sea Eagles. If anyone doesn't have Cody Walker, I think it's a good time to snap him up this week with the easy games coming up. One person I did kind of tip as potential vice captain or captain option was Damien Cook, but it was one of those games again where he just didn't really need to be involved as much as he was, say, in the last match against the Sea Eagles. On a dry track, they were able to spread the ball a lot easier than, say, last week, and so that really benefited the edge players and the left side, like Latrell, Cody Walker, Dan Gagai, for example, and not so much work during in the middle of the field. But the Rabbitohs forwards, though, were really on top of the Roosters forwards. They were just rolling up the fields. Just watching them live, they just seemed like they were so much bigger and more dominant. They were just rolling up the field. The Roosters could never even bring them to the ground or even roll them onto their backside. It just looked like they could always get quick play the balls, or were just really hard to bring down. And so I guess that really doesn't translate too well into the SuperCoach points, because it really seemed like a really good joint effort amongst them. any of the ones I would probably go for would be, say, Jai Arrow, I think. But he seems to have found a bit of new life at the Rabbitohs. And he's providing pretty good value at his price of like 470k. I think he's averaging into the 60s at the moment. So very good pickup, I think, if anyone's looking to maybe get into that Rabbitohs forward pack. Obviously, Cam Murray would be the kind of the gold standard, I guess, of them, but I think he only updated to about 55, so he hasn't really done as much, I think, as a lot of owners would hope for. In terms of the Roosters, the only two players who performed quite well were Takeaho and Tedesco. So Tedesco, he finished on 67 pre-updates, but I think he's updated to 74, which again, pretty solid effort from him. I captained him, and as I imagine a lot of people would. A 75-point game, you'll take that from your captain every week. I think with Teddy, we're probably just used to the 100-point scores, so that's what we're always hoping for. But, he was able to get that try off the kind of, that knock-on, so he was able to get some points there. He was able to also get like a goal, which was good. Just bump up his score a little bit. And Takeaho had a really solid game. Played big minutes and got through a lot of work. As you can see, he made 48 tackles with a lot of runs, and he had a goal kick in there too. So as an owner of him, very happy to see that kind of points effort. The backs obviously just didn't really get a chance, scoring only the 3 tries. Brett Morris obviously got a bit of a consolation try towards the end of the game, which would have been good for a lot of owners. I think without that, we would have been looking at a 20-point game. But still, 37 versus those 100-point games is obviously a big drop off. The big thing here with the Roosters is the injuries that they got this round. Lachlan Lamb, firstly, I think he's going to confirm now like an MCL injury, and I think he's expected to be out for maybe 4 to 6 weeks. Luke Keary, really sad to see that he's done his ACL and he's gone for the season. So, a lot of people would have been looking on Keary after he's had a really good first 2 rounds, but this is where SuperCoach gets so cruel, right? You bring in a player hoping for big things. He only scored the 30 points, but more seriously, he's done his ACL and he's out for the rest of the year. That's another trade that you're going to have to use. So I guess this probably does show that with the faster game in general, with the new rules, maybe it is more worthwhile holding onto trades. If you have a fit player who's doing okay but not amazing, it could be worthwhile just to hold them and just bank the trades for injuries, suspensions, and things like that, because it seems that these injuries are happening more often. So I think there's a valid argument to be holding your trades more. Probably something I haven't really done myself, to be honest, but I think with these early rounds, you do want to set up your team nicely. I think it's more like during the next, say, rounds up until the origin period is where you can maybe start to consolidate and hold trades as you have kind of built your team in a good state. And Lindsay Collins as well had that really bad head knock, and he was taken off the field. He was looking quite good for the Roosters as well. He was probably, in my opinion, maybe their best forward. Watching it live, he looked probably the most impactful. A shame to see him get that HIA. We'll have to wait and see on how he does. Angus Crichton as well, who I don't actually own for this week, only scoring the 59, I think he updated to. So as a non-owner, I'm happy to see only a 59. Obviously he can score a lot higher than that. But overall for the Roosters, it just wasn't the game for them. They would just come up against a red-hot Rabbitohs team, and it just wasn't their day. And they just didn't look that strong overall. I guess the one thing will be worthwhile to note for the Roosters is that with that injury to Lamb and Keary, Sam Walker, I think, will be a set to get into the team. There's really no one else I can think of who would play in the halves. I think it'd probably be him and Drew Hutchinson. So the Roosters have some kind of backup there. So I think anyone who copped the AE on Cleary and had Sam Walker as their bench reserve, I think he's finally looking to get a run in. He's someone I don't have at the moment, but definitely someone I'm going to be looking to get in over the next few weeks before his price probably increases before he's played his 3rd game. So I might not get him in straight away, but maybe after his 2nd week I'll definitely look to get him in. So the first game of the Saturday was the Raiders versus the Warriors, which was an absolute nail biter as well. I was only able to watch bits and pieces of this, but it looked really, really exciting. In terms of how the Raiders performed in terms of SuperCoach points, pretty well for some players. Jordan Rapinoe had a pretty decent game. He almost scored that try on the sound of the buzzer at the very end, and would have given the Raiders the win, but just didn't quite make it. But he scored 78 points without scoring a try, which is a pretty good effort from him. He had a try assist, a line break, some good attacking stats from him. I think if anyone has picked up George Williams, I mentioned he's doing really well, obviously scored that try. And Jackie Whiten also scored a try too, but only getting the 57, which I know, if there were owners of him, if you're scoring a try, you'd hope for a little bit more, getting into, say, the 70 points. But, you'd take that still as an owner. Josh Hodgson had a really good game. They were scoring a lot of tries just coming out of dummy half, and he was just putting them on a plate for his forwards. I think he got the try assist for Soliola and Ryan Sutton, and that's the kind of impact he can have. I imagine he would have been pretty heavily sold this week though. A lot of people probably would have been looking to do that Josh Hodgson to Jaden Brayley trade. So again, it's one of those things where, if you did sell him, don't be too upset with him doing really well. Obviously Brayley, can do very well too. And you had to focus more about why you did that trade, which is to maybe increase the cash generation. Brayley's looked really good. So, focus less on what Hodgson has scored after you trade him out and on the reasons as to why you did that trade. Ryan Sutton coming out of nowhere, I don't really think he would have been too popular. Obviously with Hudson Young coming out of the side, he would have had a lot of new owners after doing really well in the first 2 games. So unfortunate for anyone who brought him in. But I guess the story of the day for the Raiders was the bench, or the lack of the bench, because how many injuries they had. If I just go down that list there, Jared Croker had a dislocated finger. Curtis Scott, I think, had fractured ribs, but played through the whole game, which is unbelievable. Obviously, Sebastian Kris and Ryan James had that really bad head knock with each other, and both had to be left the field and didn't return. Joe Tarpany has done something to his ankle, so he was out of the game very early on too. So it was just a nightmare for the Raiders. They were ravaged by injuries. And there was that one picture, I think, of their bench. There was one guy left and then just blank seats. So it really was quite a striking image. Again, so Ryan James, who I traded this week for Jason Saab, I was tossing up between, do I put the reserve on Fumiano or Ryan James? I had a look at their stats. And I thought, the overall numbers were quite similar aside from Ryan James' attacking stats. But I thought Ryan James' minutes were probably a little bit more consistent, as was his base. And so I thought, I think he's a safe play. Obviously, we can't call ever, someone like that to get a HIA or an injury that early on in the game, and he only scored the 6 points, which is really tough to see as a player. But I think at the end of the day, you want to be more concerned about the player's welfare. And the reason, and I'm less upset about it as well, because I think a lot of people would have done a very similar move. He would have been very heavily traded in this week. He's still going to go up in value quite a bit. It's just a shame that score is going to be in his rolling average. But, for his sake, I hope that he's okay. And same with Sebastian Kris as well, because he was actually someone I didn't really talk about too much, but he's looked quite good in his first 2 games. But yeah, overall, there was some decent performers from the Raiders, but I think the most disappointing for them is that they didn't end up closing out that game. So the Warriors just did what Warriors do. They come out of nowhere and they play this expansive second phase, play heavy style of footy. And they can upset anyone on their day. And that's what they did to the Raiders here. Obviously, there was that very questionable forward pass. I watched that and I thought, what the hell? How was that not being called? I'm not a fan of the Raiders or the Warriors, but just watching that, I'm like, how can the whole stadium, how can everyone watching at home see that, but the referee can't? It's unbelievable. But anyway, the Warriors still performed really well, and I think they probably do get some tough calls at times, so I guess you could argue that it evens out over time. Tuivasa-Sheck had a great game, very solid in defense, and just very threatening from attack, scoring 108 points. I think, again, he's one of those players who I think a few people would own him, but majority of people are going to be having that Latrell, Pappenhausen, Teddy, one of those 3. So Tuivasa-Sheck, it's hard to kind of, fit him into your team, but if you have him, he's done really well for you here today. Cody Nikorima, apologies, someone in my comments asked me what were my thoughts on Nikorima, and I basically kind of just said, I don't really rate him too highly. He just kind of averages in the 50s, and then he goes off and scores 114. So apologies to that person. Hopefully you didn't take my advice and you brought him in, because he looked really electric in this game. Obviously the goal kicking really benefits him. That's something probably that needs to be discussed. With Harris Avita out for 3 months, Nikorima is going to be the goal kicker. So maybe we should consider him as a bit of that mid-range halfback or 5'8" option. He does have that dual flexibility, which does help too. Because, if he's able to get like 3 to 4 goal kicks a game, we're looking at 12 to 15 points on top of his points. So that he might be a good sneaky pickup, if the Warriors have a good draw coming up. But otherwise, he looked really good. Obviously, he scored that try with a couple of try assists as well. Sean O'Sullivan, really interesting with that 79-point effort. Obviously, I think a lot of people have been looking for that cheap halfback option. And with Sean O'Sullivan replacing Harris Avita, we thought, okay, at 230k, could he be the one? And 79 points from him is a very good effort. So I think he does certainly have a lot more kind of interest around him now. But I guess with the news of obviously what's happened with the Roosters halves, Sam Walker, I think, then becomes the clear-cut cheap halfback to go for, because you'd expect him to be the one who's going to be replacing Kiri. And with Kiri going out for the entire season, he's probably going to be the number 7 for the Roosters for the rest of the season. So he's probably going to be the best kind of cheap halfback to go for. But O'Sullivan did look pretty good, and 79 points is a very good effort from him. For Noah Blake, only played the 54 minutes, but scoring a try in there as well. 79 points, very good for a few owners of him. And Tohu Harris just keeps ticking along. If he's not doing a bunch of tackles, which he still did in this game, he's setting up tries. He did it last game, he's done it this game as well. So 76 points from him pre-updates is a really good effort from him. Definitely someone I'm looking to try bring into my team at some point sooner rather than later. He's just so consistent. You just know what you're going to get from him, and it's so good to just kind of lock down that kind of points effort from someone in your second row. So the next game was the Broncos beating the Bulldogs 24-0. I didn't actually watch any of this game. I've just been able to watch the highlights, but from all reports, this game up until about some point during the second half was pretty dire. I think it was I think the Broncos had just got a penalty goal and that was it. Just the try highlights, and Jermaine Asako actually looked really involved. So I think he would have been pretty popular coming into this week with a negative break even. And that 107 point effort, obviously you'd be ecstatic with that. He scored the try, set up a try of his own, a couple of line breaks, and with the goal kicking in there too, really does boost up his score. I think he's obviously going to be, I don't know if he'd attract a lot of new interest, because if you look at the Broncos draw now coming up after this Bulldogs game, it is very tough. In no particular order, I think they've got like the Storm, the Panthers, the Rabbitohs, and then I think the Eels in their next 4. So it's an extremely tough run. So, I'd be doubtful that he's going to be getting the 100 point effort against those really good defenses. But, he'll still make you some quick cash to begin the season, which is very handy. Tessie New with the 38 pre-updates, obviously you'll take that from your cheap centre wing. He looks to be, of the cheap centre wings aside from, say, Dane Laurie, probably the next best one to have in your team. He seems to be still getting around that 30s, 35 without any attacking stats. And if you do add in the attacking stats like we saw last week, he can easily get a big game in the 80s and 90 points. And David Mead had a pretty good effort from him too. I think a lot of people who would have jumped on him, 57 points, you'd be pretty happy to see that as well. Tavita Pangai with a 68 point effort in the 57 minutes. Again, pretty good showing from him. 68 points with no attacking stats apart from that line break assist. I did kind of put him out there as a bit of a punty captain option against the Bulldogs. But, again, didn't quite maybe reach the level that you were thinking with the previous 2 games scoring in the hundreds. But, if you're an owner of him, I think you'd be very happy to hold him. Definitely someone I think a worthwhile target to trade in. The tough games against those really, those top kind of 6 teams that I just mentioned there, doesn't really matter so much for forwards. It's more about their work rate. And I think that'd actually probably be relying on him a little bit more in those tough games. I guess the question mark is then, with Payne Haas coming back next round, how does that maybe impact his minutes? So I think if you own him, that's great. I wouldn't really be too concerned. If you don't own him, it might be worthwhile to maybe see 1 to 2 games to see how his minutes are and what his impact is with Payne Haas back in the team. So then you have a little bit more information as to whether he's a good target, and before you bring him into your team. Apart from that, Pat Carrigan had a pretty decent game, scoring 65 with a pretty decent PPM, only in the 64 minutes. But I don't really think many people are going to be considering him that much at the moment. He had a pretty low score in the last game. And I think there's just so many other good second or forward options at the moment. And he doesn't really offer that much kind of upside. Cheaper than him, you can go for Barnett or for Feeder at the moment. So, I don't really think he's really in many people's calculations. Oh, guys, my webcam has died again, but that's all right. We'll just crack on through. So, speaking about the Bulldogs against the Broncos, again, this is one of those things where they just don't seem to be able to score that many points. Even coming up against the easy guys, they just don't seem to have any kind of attacking flow, which is kind of surprising. I think a lot of people would have been thinking that with Trent Barrett coming to the side, the way that he kind of was able to improve that Panthers attack, I think a lot of people would have been hoping for the same for the Dogs. It just hasn't quite clicked yet. So I think it's one of those cases where potentially if you have any of their attacking players, for example, say Averillo still, I would probably be looking to sell. If they can't really get the points against, the easier guys, we can't really expect too much more against maybe the tougher opponent. So I think if you're an owner of, say, like an Averillo, I would definitely be looking to sell him. There's plenty of other good kind of center wing options, I think, around his price to go for, like potentially like a Blake Ferguson or a Jermaine Asako, who we kind of just touched on. I think with the Bulldogs, where you want to be looking at is the forwards. In terms of the forwards who did well, Adam Elliott, again, in the 80 minutes, had quite a good effort, scoring a line break with decent work rate too. So he's definitely someone I think you can consider. Corey Waddell, who is probably going to be the starting second rower, with Raymond Faitala-Mariner being out. The 51 points in 80 minutes, not as impressive, but I think, if you look at his price, which I can't quite remember what it is, he could be some decent value. I think Josh Jackson is the one that most people would be looking at And, after coming off that 75-point effort last week, the 49 in the 68 minutes, I think the 68 minutes is a bit of a concern. I think a lot of people would have been hoping for, say, like 80 minutes, because if you did play those 80 minutes, he probably would have got another 5-6 points to get to around that 55 average that we'd probably hope for at his price. But again, he still showed good work rate, but he just doesn't really have the upside, I guess. But, if you want your consistent kind of 55 points from like a reserve second rower, he's definitely someone I would still look into be considering. So the final game of the Saturday was the Eels versus Sharks, with the Eels taking this one out 28-4. Now, I think the scoreline does kind of reflect quite badly on the Sharks, but I don't think they performed that bad. I think it was just towards the end of the second half where they let in a few tries. They were probably fatigued after doing a lot of defending on their own line. But, the Eels, again, they looked quite good with some good performers. I think the main ones to look at in terms of the attacking players from this particular game, Gutherson looked really involved as well. And I think once Moses went down, then, he looked, obviously with the goal kicking, he was able to boost up his points a little bit more. But he just looks a lot more involved in the attacking plays, which is something I flagged pre-season, is that when Moses is out of the side, Gutherson really does take on that kind of 5'8" role. Already the modern fullback does do that, but he just does that even more. And he really, he can get a forced drop out. He become that fifth tackle option a lot more. Speaking of Moses, again, you can't really predict that. The 3 points with that HIA. I did see in one forum someone had captained Moses, which is ouch. That really hurts. So yeah, feel real sorry for that person. In terms of the right side of the Eels attack, Niokore and Blake Ferguson looked like they've got a really good partnership going on there. Niokore looks really good, he's really solid in defense against the Storm, as we saw last week, but he's able to turn it on in attack. He's able to do that little flick pass for Ferguson's try and get the try assist. And I think Ferguson is really profiting playing outside of him instead of Wanga Blake, who just never passes the ball really. So I think if you're a Ferguson owner, you're very happy with those 77 points, scoring a couple of tries. Obviously, his second try was a little bit fortuitous just at the end of the game, but doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we look at the points and he got them. On the other side of the field, Mike Acevo with the 58 points, pretty decent effort. He did have to come off the field with the HIA, but he did return and I think it was all clear. And he scored that try. And so I think, if you're looking for a punty centre wing option, Acevo could be the way to go. He can have those real stinky games where he scores like in the teens, but he can have these crazy high upside games. And they've got a few games coming up which are at Bankwest Stadium. And he does very well there. I think his record is now 27 tries in 25 games there. So I think, he's definitely someone that you could look to bring into your centre wing. Dylan Brown, who I do own, again, he doesn't have a bad floor. He scored about 39 points without any real attacking stats apart from that one forced dropout. But there comes a point where I think I have to kind of look at him and not just be impressed by the base. I need to see the attacking stats in there as well to justify his continued inclusion, I guess, in my team. They do have a good draw coming up, and I do like how he looks in real life gameplay. So I am loath to get rid of him. I think obviously with trades being so precious now with all the injuries that are happening, I'm potentially looking to hold him. But when you've got guys like Cameron Munster and Cody Walker looking so tempting, it is hard to kind of not press that trade button for them. But something I'll probably look to do in the next few weeks is look at a way where I can potentially upgrade my reserve 5'8" and maybe just hold Dylan Brown. He's probably going to go down in value quite a bit as well. So I think if I were to sell him, I would lose money on him. But if he stays in my team, there's no impact, I guess, on my squad value there to an extent. The forwards here for the Eels, again, some good performances. Campbell Gillard with that 101, obviously flattered by that try and the try assist and the line break. But, he did have a bit of a tear last season where I think he had like 5 or 6 games where he was scoring in the 80s. But he did typically regress. So I think I wouldn't read too much into that 100-point game. I don't think he's a real serious option when you've got guys like, say, Junior Paulo, Takiaho, and Payne Haas, who is coming back ahead of him in the pecking order. Isaiah Papali'i, again, had a pretty decent game, scoring the 48 points in his almost 80 minutes, playing the 74. I think Ryan Madison is expected to come back into the Eels side next week, so obviously would expect Papali'i to go back to the bench. But even when he was playing on the bench, he was scoring like in the 40s and the 50s, and so I think he's still a pretty decent kind of mid-range second row forward option to go for. Reid Marnie with the 53 points. Obviously he was extremely popular this week, given that he's going to go up in price a lot this coming week. And I think as an owner, you would take the 53 points from him. He's got that good blend of probably offering some decent points and cash generation. And he still looks quite threatening in the attack. So I think he's still a very good hold, and definitely someone, if he continues to perform like this, I think he has to be taken a lot more seriously, and if he's potentially gone up to that SuperCoach gun status. So the Sharks, again, the Sharks, similar to the Raiders, were just ravaged by injuries in this game. I think top of my head, Will Kennedy, that HIA, Katoa had that knee problem, Britton Nakora had a HIA, Wade Graham had a HIA, so they were just absolutely decimated. So obviously a lot of the forwards had to play some big minutes. Really at the Sharks, I'm not really looking at too many of their forwards. I think Toby Rudolph, who was popular from last year, he scored the 68, which is a good effort, but I don't know if I would expect that from him every week. And I think there are a lot better second row forward options around him. In terms of the backs, again, not really a team that I'm looking to target too much. I think I didn't really put too much stock into their attack without Sean Johnson. I think it's more of a case of when he comes back and they seem to be clicking, then I'd be looking at some of their attacking assets. Obviously, the most popular one would be Matt Moylan. Pretty decent effort from him, actually, scoring the 48 points. I think a lot of people would still have sold him this week, looking to get in Jaden Brayley or Connor Watson, for example, if they didn't have him. But I think Moylan is still looking to be a decent kind of cash cow option. The one thing I would say with Moylan is that if you don't have any kind of issues with the rest of your team, I think he looks still an okay sell to the likes of Josh Schuster. So I think Josh Schuster looks to be he looks a great buy overall in terms of how he looks in real life gameplay, and he's delivering the SuperCoach points. With the injuries that they've got in the Manly second row, I think he's got that position down for a few more weeks, at least until Curtis Sirinen comes back. Obviously, at that point, he might drop out of the side, but there's no reason as to why it might happen to, say, Gazewski either. So I think Schuster looks to be a good cash option to bring in, and Matt Moylan could be the guy to make way for him. You'd pocket a lot of money on the trade alone, and with Schuster going up in price as well. Aside from that, though, to be honest, not really many Sharks players that I'm looking at for. So the final two games of the round were the Newcastle Knights versus the West Tigers, and the Tigers a little bit of an upset here, taking the win 24-20 over the Knights. Now, to be honest, I watched a bit of this game, and the Knights just looked really, really sloppy. I think at one point they had 18 handling errors. This game was very winnable. If Mitch Barnett just kicked those two very gettable goals, they would have at least matched the Tigers for their score, and could have kicked on for potentially the win. Some of the players that were very commonly owned for SuperCoach, still did very well for us. Tex Hoy, who's obviously a very popular cheapie, he had a really good game. Chipped in around the field, was able to get a try assist of his own. A couple of line breaks, so a lot of good attacking stats for him there with a big 93-point effort. So if you held on to him, he should be a really good cash cow up until the time when Kalen Ponga comes back. Shibasaki had a really, really questionable game under the high ball. By the end it looked like his confidence was just shot. The Tigers were definitely targeting his side. And he just had so many drop balls, but I don't think he was really too relevant for us for SuperCoach, but you could tell that in the game he was really struggling under that high ball. David Clemmer again playing really, really big minutes, 72, and he scored 74. So, if you've owned David Clemmer since the beginning, he's put together some really good scores, playing big minutes. So I don't know whether that's going to be sustainable or not. I think that probably would have been helped with Jacob Saifidi getting that leg injury fairly early into his stint. But, again, that's the thing that you'll expect from Clemmer. He just puts his hand up, goes through a lot of work regardless of how many minutes he's going to get. Jaden Brayley, again, really, really good outing from him, getting that 80 points. Obviously he laid on the try for Mitch Barnett from dummy half, which is what we've kind of seen in the past 2 weeks. So again, very, very happy to have him. Obviously, I think he was probably one of the most popular trades in this round, and as you can see why. He's been able to get some good points, and he's definitely going to be a good cash generating option too. If he keeps up at this rate, which would be amazing. He is definitely a genuine keeper. He's got scores above 80 in all of his games, and I think he puts in a shift as well, getting 51 tackles. So that's the kind of thing that you want to see out of your dummy halves in SuperCoach, making lots of tackles but having a bit of attacking threat as well. Dan Saifidi again also had a very bit of a bounce back game. He obviously had that tremendous round 1 score, bit of a low score last week, but he's come back again with a good 70-point effort in this game too. I think the game was very forward dominant. Tyson Frizzell, who I'd kind of mentioned as a bit of a pod forward, he's actually done really well in this game too. He's basically scored about 48 in base from his tackles and his hit-ups, but he was able to get that try and a line break thrown in there as well. So Mitch Barnett with the 71 points, bit of a love-hate relationship. Obviously, I'm very happy with the 71 points, but I think I was being a little bit greedy, and I really wanted his goal-kicking points too. He scored the try and got the line break from that ball that Jaden Brayley laid on for him. But he was very close to scoring a second one as well. He just knocked it on over the try line. But having him miss those two really gettable goal kicks was a concern, because we saw that he got the goal kicking duties taken off him midway through the game, and it was given to Tex Hoy. That does potentially spell some bad news for his prospects moving forward. Obviously we could potentially just say that, he had a bit of an off game, so the duties were taken off him, but he'll get them back from next week onward. You easily could just be, well, Texway kicked him well, so we'll give it to him. And Barnett's appeal, as being that goal kicking second row forward, is gone. And obviously a lot of people brought him in this week, and me included as well, thinking that goal kicking, potentially the way that he was going, he looked like he was more of a certainty to be holding on to it, even with Ponga coming back. But this potentially does put a bit of a spanner in the works. It's just something I think to keep an eye on. I'd really be hopeful that he does keep the goal kicking, but overall we can't be too greedy. He still scored pretty well with a decent work rate. And we can't really complain with the 71 point effort. Connor Watson, though, coming off the bench has been an absolute dream. Obviously it looks like the tactic will be that they'll name him in the starting role, but he would just come off the bench in the last minute team lists. But even coming off the bench, he still delivers the goods, getting 91 points. He just has a good combination of a good work rate, but he's got a lot of good footwork and attacking potential through the middle, and he really made an impact at when he came onto the field. He was able to contribute a line break assist and a try assist for Mitch Pearce, and was also involved in the build up to Tyson Frizzell's try when he offloaded to Texway. So overall, I think Connor Watson is an incredibly good, good value Supercoach player. I don't think there's any reason as to why you'd want to be trading him anytime soon. I know it sounds really obvious, but I guess when you got the guys like Josh Schuster coming up in the 5'8" role, if you've got Connor Watson, you might be looking to make some money. You could potentially make that switch, but that's not something I'd really recommend at the moment. The way that he's going, even coming off the bench, he's delivering the points, and he's going to make a stack of cash. So definitely would be holding on to Connor Watson, and really happy to be playing him in your 17. In terms of the Tigers, they put in a really good showing in this game, able to get the upset. In terms of the Supercoach assets, Dane Laurie, again, is just continuing to deliver the points, scoring the 74, and, you look the way he's playing, I think he's looking more and more like a genuine keeper, and at his price, absolute value. He led on the try for Nofaluma, had a couple of line breaks. It seems like, whenever he gets the ball back from his own end, anyone that tries to rush up on him, he just very easily gets some good tackle breaks, which just screams Supercoach points for us, which we absolutely love. So players keep rushing up on him. Nofaluma, again, bounced back with a good game, getting the 88 points. Bit of just what he did last year. He was scoring so many tries, making so many runs out of his own end, and just very consistently getting into that 70 and 80 point range. This is probably the first time it's really happened though this year. Obviously he probably would have been heavily sold by anyone who did have him. Probably a lot of people, I guess, would have done a switch down to, say, a Brett Morris. I don't think that's necessarily was a bad move. Nofaluma was looking to go down in price and Brett Morris going up. But Nofaluma, again, he just gave us a glimpse of what he can do. So he's definitely going to be someone I think I'll look to target whenever, say, the Tigers go on a good run of games, and hopefully he's maybe gone down in price by then. I think that'd be a good tactic to adopt with Nofaluma. But he's shown in the past that he can score big against anyone, so sometimes the opposition doesn't really matter for him, given that he's got a really good base floor. Adam Dewey had a really good game. He got the goal. He had the goal kicking duties, which really bumped up his score. But he got the try and the try assist, and overall looked really involved. Had that good 92-point game. And Luke Brooks actually had a really good game. He led on a couple of tries, and I think he bounced back pretty well from last game, where his kicking game really wasn't that good against the Roosters, but he put on some nice kicks, like say for Dewey's try. So I think Luke Brooks was fairly owned, I think, at that backup halfback spot. To be honest, I don't think he's done too badly for his price. So I think I wouldn't necessarily go out and buy him. I think it's more of a case of that if you've got him from the start, you just kind of stick with him for now, because he seems to be still doing decent with the points. In terms of the more popular assets, Jacob Little, obviously, in 61 minutes getting the 46 points, that's kind of, I think, what we should really be expecting from him. That 50 to 60 minute mark where he gets in around that 50 point scoring. I still think he's going to be making some decent cash, but I do see a lot of people making that switch from Josh Schuster in the next week. Most likely they've got Connor Watson in their 5'8". They'll do the swap from Little down to 5'8" to be able to trade in Josh Schuster. I don't know if I'll do that myself. I think I'll have to kind of take stock of and look at my team, get any more updates on injuries, because there were a lot obviously this round, before I maybe decide to make that trade. Given the way that the injuries have kind of been compounded, I think this week, it really does make me think that holding the trades as often as we can during the season is good. While the cash generation, I think, yes, it is important. It showed this week that holding those trades really was crucial. Guys who traded in like Luke Keary, Ben Hunt, Ryan James, for example, all these guys were really heavily traded in, and they all got knocks. Obviously with Ben Hunt and Luke Keary being a bit more serious. Ryan James, we still don't quite know yet if he'll be back next week. but I guess it really showed that, holding the trades is important. So I don't necessarily know if I'd be completely on board with doing that Jacob Little to Schuster switch. It depends, I guess, on what happens with the rest of my team. And if I'm really happy with the rest of it, then maybe I could do that bit of a luxury trade. Or Stefano Ochikamanu, I guess, getting that try was really, really good to see. Obviously, in hindsight, I wish I would have played him, but not really someone I was going to consider playing in my 17. But him scoring the try with that line break really did bump up his score. So he should be looking to go up quite a bit in value. And he's actually probably overperformed, I think, what a lot of people were expecting. I think a lot of people were probably expecting maybe like 20 minutes, and so maybe getting like 25 points from him. But so far, he's kind of been playing a little bit more than that, and he's kind of getting into the 40-point mark. And this 67 pre-updates, I think, is really good. Should hopefully bounce up his price quite a bit. So the final game of the round was the Cowboys versus the Titans up in North Queensland. For the Cowboys, again, it's just one of these times where they just don't look to have any kind of attacking flourish, and they just seem to be leaking so many points. Similar to the Sea Eagles, I think if anyone's playing the Cowboys, you definitely want to be targeting them as one of the easier guys, I think, for your attacking players. Val Holmes made the switch to fullback in this game, with the backline shuffling a little bit. So Scott Drinkle moved into the halves, Habensai Tabuai Fido moved to the wing, and Justin O'Neill moved to the left centre. So I guess this is kind of what we wanted to see, pre-season. We wanted to see Val Holmes playing at fullback, where we know he's a little bit more involved, and his point scoring is typically going to be a little bit higher. We saw obviously he scored 60 points in the 80 minutes. He had a couple of good breaks, and later on the try. So, he still scored fairly well. I guess at the moment, though, it's hard to justify paying the $510K for him at the moment. But if this fullback switch does seem more long-term, I think definitely you want to be keeping an eye on him, see how his kind of price trends. And if the Cowboys do have a run of easy games, I think I would pick him up. But, at his current price of $510, I really wouldn't be considering when you've got so many other good guys around that price. You can pay an extra $10K for like a Brian To'o, and you just know you're going to get a 55 to 60 basically every week in just base. And even cheaper guys below him, like your Blake Ferguson, the Nasakos, who are still performing fairly well too. But aside from that, honestly, I'm not really looking to invest in any of the Cowboys players. The Titans, again, a lot of SuperCoach relevance here. AJ Brimson, again, performed really well, and I did recommend him as a bit of a sell this week. But, he scored a couple of tries, led on a couple of tries as well, and, showed why he's such a good SuperCoach asset. But I think it wasn't really a bad decision to sell him necessarily if you're looking to capitalize on the price changes, because we had guys like Pappenhausen, Latrell and Teddy performing so well in that fullback spot. Philip Sammy had a great game as well with a 94, looked really good down the edge there, scoring a try, getting a couple of line breaks and a try assist as well. Bit of a sneaky player actually I want to talk about is Tyrone Peachey. He made the switch to lock just before the game started, with Tino actually moving to starting prop. And he's actually performed quite well to begin the season. I think he's had a couple of scores in the 50s, and that was coming off the bench. He gets a role in the starting lineup, and he gets a 77. He is listed in the centers and second row forward, so he's definitely someone to be keeping an eye on. I think if it looks like he's going to be kind of nailing that number 13 spot, and Tino is going to be at the prop position, Tyrone Peachey then does become very compelling. That center, second row forward. I think you'd definitely be looking to put him in your center wing. Because if he's a starting lock, he's got probably then some good base stats. He's got a bit of attacking threat too. And it's a little bit more reliable than, say, relying on like your cheaper center wings. I think at the moment he's priced around the 400K, so it is a little bit awkward. But if you can fit the budget, and it looks like he's going to be playing in the starting 13, I think he could be a really good buy in that position. Jamal Fogarty, who I do own, I was very happy to see the Titans rack up a score, because that meant he got a bunch of points from goal kicking. He kicked 8 goals, so 32 out of his 72 points was purely from goal kicks. So if you take that away, he's only scoring 40, so it's not that good. But really, again, does highlight the benefit of these goal kickers. If their team does well, they can rack up a lot of bonus points. He also did get the try assist for Mo Fotuaika, and I think potentially, obviously, with Ash Taylor being out of the side for the next couple of weeks, his involvement did increase. So very happy to hold him for now. I really was waiting to see if he can get into the 70s. I think that's kind of scores I was hoping from him. And this is good to see that he's got that performance in him, and the Titans do have a good run of games coming up as well, so definitely a good hold for me to keep Fogarty. The only question mark I guess I will have is that if Sam Walker, obviously I'd expect him to be playing in the number 7 role for the Roosters now, and he'd be a very, very good cash cow option. Fogarty at the moment is my backup half, so it might be a case where in say 2 or 3 weeks I might have to potentially trade Fogarty down to Sam Walker just to kind of capitalize on firstly get the price rise, and potentially also use that money to spread around the rest of my team. So that's kind of a decision we'll have to see in the next couple of weeks. Fortunately, I won't have to make that call right now, but you know, if he does keep performing like this, it will be harder and harder to justify selling him. Tino getting the 56 points and 57 looked really good coming in at prop. I think he obviously had a couple of like handling errors, but you know, the 56 and 57 minutes, I'll take that at his price. So I'm not looking really to trade him anytime soon. I think there's probably other players that'll be looking to switch out instead of him at the moment. So I think I'm still happy to hold Tino. Dave Fifita, obviously, again, being a wrecking ball once again, scoring the 98 points with a try, a bunch of tackle breaks, you know, getting the line break as well. This is the kind of thing that you'd expect from him. You know, he showed us last week what a damaging ball runner he is, and he did it again today. I wouldn't be surprised if he's owed like another tackle break or two. You can see he's got 9 of them there, so they really just bumped up his score. I think I did see a few people captaining Dave Fifita, and if they did, obviously he performed really well. He's obviously outperformed the more popular guys like Teddy, so good call for anyone who did captain him. I think I'm looking definitely to see how I can maybe fit Fifita into my team. I don't know whether it's the case of, say, maybe again withholding on getting Angus Crichton and say jumping on Dave Fifita first. The Titans run of game I believe is quite good as well, so that definitely does spell some good news for Fifita, and definitely some good games coming from him hopefully in the next few rounds. Alright guys, I thought it wouldn't be really fitting for this round to not show the carnage that it was, but as you can see there were just so many injuries here. I'm not even going to count. I think there's like 30 players there. Obviously a few of the big ones we knew coming into this round, like Cleary, Pappenhausen and Madison, but the amount of injuries that were copped during the week was just unbelievable. So again, this is something I just want to maybe to highlight on its own slide, that it was just carnage this round basically, which really I think just does maybe emphasize the point of holding on to those trades. You know, if there's some kind of player who is fit and he's giving decent points, maybe it's better to just consider holding them. You know, while some other player might be more appealing, having those trades in the back pocket for these kind of get out situations with injuries, I think definitely will prove valuable over the season. It just seems that the way that the rules are, the way the game is played, a little bit more pace in it. The players do seem to be picking up a little bit more of those kind of muscle injuries. Obviously, I'm not a doctor at all. That's just kind of my own observation and something that other players and you know, fans have also mentioned too. So I think that is something to be keeping an eye on and be mindful of. Obviously, the big guys here would probably be like your Ben Hunt, who I think was very popular, your Luke Keary's, for example, you know, your Hudson Young, your Ryan James, again, were very popular assets too, and Mitchell Moses to an extent as well. But again, all this obviously we'll have to kind of wait and see on team lists and more info throughout the next week as well, as to the kind of expected return of a lot of these players. Right guys, well that's my thoughts on round 3. It was absolutely definitely a roller coaster of a round. Pre-updates, I finished my score at the moment on 1075, which I don't think is too bad of a score. I feel like par is around that 1050 to 1100, so I feel like I haven't done too poorly, but I haven't really excelled either. Just kind of one of those weeks where you just kind of hover where you at. But we'll see how the updates fall in. At one point, honestly, I thought I was not going to make it over 1,000, but I think the Knights game and the Titans game really brought it through. I had some good performers in there. So at the moment, pretty happy, and I'll give a final update on my score once we find out tomorrow after lockout. One final note for me, I am going on holiday throughout this week, so I'm going to try to maybe put out another video on like the team list and potential captaincy options, but I'm actually going somewhere quite regional and I don't actually know how good the internet's going to be, but we'll see how I go. So if there isn't any more content for this week, that's probably going to be the reason why, but I will try to put out something. It just probably won't be quite to the standard that I'd hope for. But guys, that's it. That'll be the end of the video. If you did like it, really would appreciate a thumbs up, and do please consider subscribing, as I'll be continuing to put out more content throughout the 2021 season. But until then, I'll see you guys in the next video.